Hi everyone, welcome to one of the final painting guides for the Star Wars Legion core box set miniatures. So what we're going to be looking at today is Darth Vader himself. He's obviously your leader in the Empire half of the box set, and interestingly, he's one of the only models in that half of the box set which isn't pure white. So painting this is going to take a slightly different approach, but if you wanted, what you could do is just prime him black, as I have. I used a spray can from Halfords. Painting the details and then call it that. There's not much to it really. What I'm going to try to do is pick out the details and highlight it to a point where it's not turned from black to grey, but then also you can still see a difference between the tones, especially on areas you'll see when the model's on the tabletop. Like you can see there the shine on the cloak where it'll be highlighted, a shine on the helmet. So what I'm probably going to do is take some pictures so I've got something to refer to, so I can look at it, so I can see from this angle. If I position my light in a certain area, you can see the shine at the top here, you can see the shine on the cloak. Turn him round, you can see the shine as it falls on his face. Gives you an idea of the bits you're going to need to highlight when you're looking at painting this model. So before I go any further, I need to recommend the painting guide which has inspired my method, and that's Rastro's painting guide, and he did a entire video series for Star Wars Legion, and his stuff looks absolutely fantastic. He's got a lot more patience, and so he shows you actually the individual highlighting stages and everything, whereas I'm just going to talk through the process that I went to. So having primed this with black, we've got a pretty sort of like boring starting point. So what I'm going to do is, on the black areas, I'm going to go over and I'm going to mix a little bit of the original colour, which is not that. The original colour being model colour black. And then into that, with a little bit of glazed medium, I'm going to add some game colour night blue. And this is just to give it a sort of like a little bit of a tone, so it's not just black and grey. And we're going to highlight up through those levels. The first one really is just a case of separating between what's black and what can be, or different shades of black. So I'll go ahead and do this, and I'll come back and I'll show you the bits I painted, and we'll talk about the next steps after that. So I've put down a couple of layers of the black mixed with the dark blue. And after that, well, with a little bit of glazed medium in as well, after that added a bit of one of my favourite colours, which is model colour black grey. And this is a very good colour, and you can see, even just looking at the bottles, the difference in the tone. The black is very much darker, and it's a nice colour to normally start with for black, because if I were to pick up one of these stormtroopers, it looks black on other models, whereas if you were to look closely, you can actually see that this is grey compared to the bits I've not yet painted. So for a model like this, where I don't want to go too far and I don't want to end up looking like he's grey, it's very good as sort of like a starting point for highlighting. So as you can kind of see, I'm trying to get the light angle good. I've highlighted on some of the areas where there's cloth on his legs, his tunic and the helmet, some of the areas where I know there's going to be highlights. I've done the same on his arms, and in particular where you can see it the most on the cape. So these large areas here which need to be highlighted, and it's coming on quite well. I'm taking it slowly, building it up layer by layer, so that, as I said earlier, I'm not going to end up with a grey Darth Vader. If I do go too far, then I can go back over it with some of the original colour, which I've kept a little bit of each time. Or, worst comes to the worst, push comes to the shove, I just put some Nuln Oil on it. That'll knock the colours back a tone or two and hopefully try and sort of like smooth them out. So if I get any areas where it looks like I need to tone it down, that's what I'll be doing. As I go, I'll be adding more of the black grey until I'm working up to more of a London grey. This is sort of like, if I was going to use a sort of like what's the word, like a three stages for the colour, I'd normally go black, grey, London grey, because it's a very nice gradient from one to the other. So I'll be adding a little bit of this in just to keep the edge highlights and the areas looking a bit more sort of pronounced. So I'll continue on in this vein and then come back with the next step for you. So now I'm coming to the limit of what I can accomplish with just the London grey. As you can see, it gives a very nice highlight on the helmet, areas of his legs, his chest armour, and even if I spin him round, you can see it gives a nice sort of layer on the back of the helmet and his cloak. But beyond that, I want to start looking a bit more at the extreme areas where it needs to be highlighted. So you can see like the top of the crest over his helmet, the areas around the edge of the helmet, and bits on his hands, arms, gloves, just where the light will be catching, because it's quite important to get some light highlights in before we do the lightsaber. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm actually going to use some light grey, and to make it a little bit easier to work with, I'll be using glaze medium, and I'll just be picking out the very edges and the areas where it needs to be exceptionally light. And I'll also, for the very, very last stage of that, be adding a little bit of dead white, so that is pure white, but that will just be on the very, very corners. I may revisit it before I go ahead and decide whether I actually need to, but that's my starting point. I'm also going to start putting some white paint onto the lightsaber blade, so that when I come to paint that, it's easier to paint rather than having to put layer after layer after a red. So I'll go ahead and do those bits and then come back and show you a bit more of what I've actually managed to get done. So I've added some edge highlights on Vader using the Vallejo light grey mixed with a little bit of glaze medium, and then a very, very, very edge highlights, a very extreme highlight of white. And you can see, I mean, it's looking a little bit in places like it's a bit over the top, but in particular on the arms here and side of the body, that's because I want to be able to have a good base layer for when I start adding some object source lighting for the blade. So when I start applying that red glaze, if I'm applying that over black, it doesn't really show up very well. Whereas if I'm applying that over a grey, it actually looks like it's a highlight from the lightsaber rather than anything else. So I've put a bit more detail onto the helmet, as you can see from the back. Quite happy with how this is turning out. I think this is probably the limit of what I consider acceptable for highlighting black with grey and white. I think anything beyond this, it starts to look, and it does a little bit on the front, I'll admit, it starts to look like you are painting a grey model. But black's such a hard colour to paint anyway, I think it's forgivable on something like this. I've put the first layer of white onto the lightsaber. I'll put a couple of other layers and then start off with the base colour for the lightsaber. After this, really all there is to add some of the details, for example the chain around his throat that holds his cape in place. Add some of the sort of like buttons and things, the lights that he has on his chest plate there, and that's about it done. So I'll go ahead and make those finishing touches and then come back and show you what a finished Vader can look like. So we're coming to the point now where we're actually probably finished with the painting of the Mini itself. I've gone over the chain around his neck, just with a little bit of Vallejo game colour chainmail, just to try and make it stand out a bit. I've added some of the lights to the chest plate, so hadn't realised actually until I started googling this that the lights and the layout of the buttons and pieces on the chest plate actually changes depending on which film you're watching. So I've just gone for the one which looks the best. I think it actually is maybe the episode 5 and 6 layout, not really too sure, but that's just some blue lights and red lights, grey buttons. On his belt here he's also got some sort of like green button areas with grey buttons on it as well. I added silver to the belt buckle, and there's not really much to do at that point. So to do the lightsaber and the OSL, I started with Vallejo model colour red, which is just a standard red, and then just with a very, very watered down. And I actually used water this time rather than glaze medium, and it seems to have done pretty much exactly the same thing. I just painted, making sure to actually take out any of the areas where it was pooling, where any of the paint pooled up into big gloops, and just went along the areas where the shadow would be, or sorry, not the shadow, the light from the blade would be cast. I didn't want to go too over the top, so I kind of stopped at this point of his chest and made sure I didn't go too much onto the cloak. So it's visible down this stretch of the cloak here, onto his hand, up, onto the first sort of like quarter of his torso. I possibly should put some down here, but it would be very, very light because I don't want it to look too much. But overall, I am very happy with how he's looking. I'm going to have to make sure when I do base him that I do the same sort of like effect with the object source lighting on the base. And the very final thing was to finish off the blade itself, and I just mixed a little bit of white into it, and starting from the base kind of like ran that out the length of the blade, and then sort of like edge highlighted down this side and this side. I mean, it's not really a necessary step either because you can't really see it from the tabletop, but I still think it looks very effective, and I'm happier with this model than I expected to be. So really enjoyed painting him. I think it's a new experience for me painting this much black on one miniature, and also the object source lighting as well. So thanks for watching. I hope you found this interesting. Once I've based this, I'll go ahead and add some pictures so you can see what it looked like. But from me, that's Vader done. So next we'll be looking at some of the other bits and pieces that I've got in the core box. Thanks for watching.